on the fringes of the great empires, far from the trade routes of the Mediterranean coast, in a rocky desert where water was in short supply. It's a miracle anything should flourish in Jerusalem. And yet in this holy city, in a very concentrated period of time, 3 great religions emerged from the desert, religions that today count some 4 billion adherents. The history of Jerusalem, as one historian writes, is nothing less than the history of the world. Alexander the Great conquers the known world, or what he thought was the known world. The famous lines, "When he beheld the breadth of his empire, Alexander wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer." There were actually more worlds to conquer, but he didn't want to acknowledge that. Anyway, one of the worlds he did conquer was the whole of the Middle East and the Holy Land. And he issued these beautiful coins, and his heirs and ancestors ruled over Jerusalem and the surrounding area for centuries.
The first Jewish coins were minted in 134 BC. They were minted by a fellow by the name of Hyrcanus, and he was a descendant of the famous general Judah Maccabee.
Maccabee means the hammer in Aramaic, hammer, because he is the one who managed to repulse the yoke of these heirs of Alexander the Great, the Seleucids they were called. He kicked them out of Jerusalem and claimed an independent Jewish state.
Many coins were made during that period of time, of the next 100 years, when the Maccabean dynasty was in power. This was the first Jewish kingdom that had been around since the time of King David, from 1000 BC area. This period, this 100-year period, was called the Second Temple period.
Unfortunately, as the Seleucids withdrew, a new power came from the other direction, and that power was called Rome.
They basically decided this was a good area to take over, so that's what occurred. And subsequent to that period, they installed it became a quote-unquote client kingdom. And at that point, they installed something called the Herodian Dynasty. And the Herodian Dynasty, again, was a wonderful source of coins, and that carried on for quite a while. For almost another 100 years was the descendants of Herod.
Herod the Great, fascinating figure. He's Jewish, but he's also thoroughly Romanized. He's good friends with Caesar Augustus. He's good friends with Marcus Agrippa. He's in like Flynn with the Roman government. So they let him be the king of the Jews, King Herod, which was a title they had not let the previous people have. Herod was very successful. He built a lot of things. He built the Second Temple, or at least refurbished the temple to such a degree it was this massive thing, the center of the Jewish culture in Jerusalem. He built things here and there, but he was also crazy. He murdered his wife. He murdered his children, causing Caesar Augustus to say that he would rather be Herod's pig than his son. It would be safer.
In addition to the Herodian, there was a parallel government of governors that were appointed directly by the Roman emperors, and they collected money, and they also issued coins.
So you had the kings, you had the Herodian kings, but you also had the Roman provincial leaders who went in and did the taxes. And this is one of the famous biblical passages where Jesus is presented with should we pay the tribute or not? And Jesus takes a coin. This is an example of a coin being mentioned in the Bible. Looks at the coin and says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's, which is a great answer. What's amazing about Pilate is that this is a guy who's essentially, he's a governor of a pretty inconsequential province in Rome. We think of Jerusalem and Judea as being this major center, but it really wasn't. It was really a podunk place in the middle of the desert. And he's the governor of this place. It's like, and he's the only person from this time period that we know really well. It's like, if 2,000 years from now, the governor of Idaho were suddenly this hugely important religious figure for some execution that happened there under his guidance. Porcius Festus is one of the Roman governors during the imprisonment of St. Paul. St. Paul is the one who basically took the teachings of Christ and went hither and yon with it. He's the one that took it mainstream. If Christianity was like an indie rock band, he was the record executive that came and made sure that every radio station was playing it, right? St. Paul is arrested, he's detained, and Festus doesn't want to keep him in jail, and he says, let's see what we can do with you. And Paul goes on this long rant about God and heaven and this and that, and Festus says, and this is in the Bible, he says, Paul, you've gone mad. All this great learning has made you insane. And Festus eventually sends St. Paul to Rome because he could be tried as a Roman citizen. And it is in Rome that he's tried and eventually, we think, executed. So Rome is where the Saints Paul and Peter are both executed. And that has some significance in Rome being the center of the papacy later on.
So between all of these different groups issuing coins, that came to an abrupt halt right around the time of 66 AD. This is a time when the Jews got fed up with the Romans, and at one point it became apparent that the Romans needed to be gotten rid of. Of course, that didn't work out real well. They, as it turns out, that was the last coins that were issued by the Jews are the coins that were issued during the quote-unquote the First Revolt.
The revolt has gotten so nasty that the Romans have concluded that the only way to make these guys stop revolting is to just flat out destroy them. And they come to Jerusalem and they just raze the place. They destroy the temple, which is it's like destroying the Washington Monument or something. It's this huge marble thing. And it must have taken them weeks or months to just raze it. But they managed to do it. They raze it, they kill everybody there, they destroy everything. And when they leave, Jerusalem is a complete and total ruin. 70 AD, just completely destroyed, and it's in ruins for 100 years. It's not until the later Roman emperors come, and really until Constantine comes in the 4th century, that Jerusalem is almost completely rehabilitated. When the last of the Jewish revolutionaries commit suicide at Masada, and this is, I think, in 73 AD, there were coins from that period. There would not be Jewish coins issued again until 1948.